Hi, this is John Yeager with Bennett Thrasher, Managing Director of Business Transformation Services. Another episode of Think Business, and I would like to welcome a special guest we have today, Cory Bennett, who's a partner at Bennett Thrasher, and he oversees the restaurant hospitality segment of the firm. Cory, welcome to the show.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me today. Look forward to the discussion.
Absolutely. Why don't you give us a little background of your background and what you do for the firm and those kind of things in more detail?
Sure, absolutely. So as John mentioned, I'm an audit partner here at Bennett Thrasher. I primarily focus on probably three industries. Restaurant hospitality is probably the biggest for me. Also do a lot of distribution and construction are kind of my three specialty areas that I focus on. In addition to an audit partner role, really over the past 5 to 7 years, I've done a lot in the transaction advisory space. Just given so much going on in the market, that is an area where I've spent a good bit of my time. So traditional audits, reviews, those types of things, 401k audits, but in addition, spending a good bit of time on the M&A side of the fence as well. So that's kind of my primary focus. Really spending a lot of time on the restaurant hospitality segment, just given the growth. But believe it or not, Atlanta is one of the probably top 5 cities in the U.S. for restaurants. And so this is definitely an area where we've really grown as a firm. And as a result of that, I have really invested a lot of time, energy, and resources into this practice segment. So this is definitely a big one for us, and I'm very fortunate to lead the efforts.
Awesome. Well, today's conversation is really taking advantage of your background in the restaurant space as well as the deal advisory space, transaction advisory space. Kind of want to bring those two things together. So I guess I want to lead off the conversation with what are you seeing in the marketplace? Obviously, we're in a strange world right now, and that's been positive for some and obviously negative for others. What are you seeing in general in the transaction advisory space? What kind of deals are you seeing, and what's that look like for going forward?
Yeah, it's as you mentioned, John, very interesting times right now. Right before COVID, for us in the middle market space in particular, I would say M&A was probably at the height. With the low interest rate structure, a lot of private equity. I mean, there was a lot of movement on closing deals, and so we were actively involved in a handful, or not a handful, but a lot of buy and sell side engagements. But with COVID, obviously that did kind of slow down the activity a bit, especially in the March, April timeframe. But surprisingly, John, I have seen it come back in a kind of a little bit of an aggressive way. And I think if you look at it, I think there's probably two facets to it. I think one, folks are thinking that there could be opportunity to retrade or get something at a little bit of a discounted value because companies are kind of working their way through this. And so I think a lot of investors see this as maybe an opportunity to pick up something a little bit cheaper and being able to kind of turn that and really make that into something from a good IRR perspective. And then I think a lot of other types of transactions we're seeing are kind of led by private equity. I think private equity is still aggressive. So although they're looking for things to on the cheap or maybe a little bit discounted, at the same time, I think they're still kind of carrying out their strategic kind of plan. And so a lot of deals that were probably in some sort of development stage pre-COVID, I think a lot of those are starting to kind of see those pick back up now. So I do think Q4 and I think Q1, you're really going to start to see some pretty good movement. The debt markets still are a little bit tight, and for obvious reasons, given kind of where we are. So I think that some of those types of deals are starting to slow down. But again, I think private equity is definitely doing their part to keep things moving.
What industries do you see are specifically kind of benefiting from deal activity?
Yeah, I think those that really didn't have an impact, as much on COVID. I think that a lot of the segments that kind of were a little bit neutral. I mean, if you think about, just high level, some of the distribution, delivery, anything that was kind of protected as a result of kind of the cycle that we just went through. Technology, you're continuing to see that, have a pretty good, activity. So I would say those are the ones where you're really seeing, distressed companies, that really need to figure out what they need to do. Those are, you're seeing a lot of those types of discussions as well. We've got several of those types of engagements going on where, they have to figure out something and they've got to transact in some environment. If it, or potentially it would end up in some sort of bankruptcy situation. So kind of across the board to some extent, I do think it's a little industry agnostic, just really more specific to, what's happened at that particular company.
Absolutely. So specifically in the QSR space, I know you've been involved in a number of transactions recently, and you've probably got a few in the pipeline. What's that looking like, and what do you think's driving that?
Yeah, so it's an interesting space. I mean, if you think about my client base and really as a firm, I mean, restaurants, hospitality were probably hit the hardest with COVID, John. And so, really seeing how they've responded to that has been very interesting, and then how the market has perceived that as well. And so, as it relates to the restaurant segment, we are seeing some activity pick up, and I think it kind of follows very similarly to what we discussed before. Those companies that were not hit as heavy, and I think a lot of that is in the QSR space. If you think about it, they were set up for delivery anyway, right, or drive-through. So, I think that those clients in particular, or that segment, really came out of it probably on the favorable side. I think a lot of them, you're seeing same-store sales increase year over year, and those are all good metrics to kind of transact in this environment. So QSR really has held its own, and I think that's there's a big appetite for that as we continue. So you've seen a lot of refranchise activity and other things going on, and really kind of lobbying around a good operator, and those are where we're seeing those transactions kind of come out. So QSR has been good. Fast casual is starting to kind of pick back up. I think obviously the one area where we've seen the biggest hit is on the fine dining space. I mean, that's one where it's going to take some time to kind of rebound, to kind of restore the confidence in going back into a crowded restaurant. And then obviously the delivery aspect of fine dining just doesn't seem to work. I mean, I know we're working through things, and our clients are doing a very proactive job in trying to figure out how to deliver a hot steak, through Uber Eats or something to that effect. But I think if you look at the chain, at QSR definitely is kind of made it out okay. But then, even on the fast casual side, we've seen transactions in that space. We've seen same-store sales already recover to the pre-COVID levels to some extent, and I think that's what investors are trying to look for. They didn't want to. They wanted to see the recovery first before going into some sort of transaction. And I think that once you have that in place, and you can kind of see that as being sustained for a period of time, I think that's really where you're ready to go back to market, and that's what we've seen in our spaces. We had that lull in the April timeframe, but then once stores started to kind of respond and kind of open back up and see that growth and that opportunity, I do think that that's an area where you're ready to kind of go back to the market. And then obviously, from the franchising perspective, the window's a little bit longer than it was before for obvious reasons. And so, that is impacting models and how people look at and value businesses. But surprisingly, valuations, at least at where we are right now, haven't really been impacted as much. Again, I think that they've seen that growth and that same-store sales increase. And I think that they're pretty comfortable, transacting at a pre-COVID type rate. Obviously, on the bankruptcy side and the distress side, that's a different story. But that's positive. I definitely think that that's a good thing for the industry, and hopefully we continue to see that as we open back up, as same-store sales start to continue to climb. And then obviously, companies are looking at the delivery model a little bit differently, and that is the wave of the future. And that is going to have a margin impact on businesses, and how do they sustain that same growth and that same cash flow in this post-COVID environment, and clients are really focusing hard on those efforts.
Gotcha. So when you look at the deal flow, who's driving it, or where's the money coming from? Is it private equity backed? Is it some of the larger franchisees, or taking out debt, or did they have free cash flow to take on, maybe smaller franchisees that kind of weren't ready for this? What's kind of driving it from who the investor is?
Yeah, absolutely, John. Great question. I think a good bit of it is private equity. I think that's where we're seeing a good bit of the activity. But we are seeing some companies that had strong balance sheets take this as an opportunity. I think a franchisor that had a portfolio of franchisees, maybe this is an opportunity for them to take out an underperformer, right? And maybe either encourage a sell to a better operator, or potentially even buy back that franchisee and run it as a corporate store going forward. So I think folks are being very strategic about it, John. But I do think private equity is kind of where they were hot out of the gate in this post-COVID environment. But at the same time, we are seeing some strategic deals that are just as attractive. So we're seeing it across the board, but I would definitely weigh more towards the private equity side.
Gotcha. So you mentioned the delivery side of things. Obviously, there's been a lot of consolidation there, right? And you mentioned that that's certainly going to affect margins. And I would think that as there's consolidation, right? So there's fewer participants, and so they have greater command and control. So is that kind of what you're seeing? What's the impact that you've seen early on from some of that consolidation?
Yeah. So are you talking about consolidation on the delivery side, John, or just in
Yeah, like
the market?
DoorDash, the Uber Eats, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it is changing the landscape, but in order to be competitive in this environment, you have to embrace delivery, right? Otherwise, your business is going to be significantly hit. From our clients, their delivery model has increased, up to 4 times, the volume. And so, I think it is important to, partner with the right people in that chain and do it in a way that, has no impact on the brand. And so, whoever does it best from a timing perspective, a freshness perspective, and, I think that's where, consumers are really trying to get to, and that really drives the volume for our businesses that we work with. And so I do think that's important to make sure you're managing that the best way possible, because again, that is going to be a very significant impact to your business going forward, even once we get out of this environment. I think a lot of people will continue to do that, just given the convenience aspect of it and everything that else goes along with it. So it's very important, but again, margins are different because you've got different rates because of the consolidation that you mentioned, John. But also, you're taking that, the alcohol aspect of it to some extent, depending on your locale, out of the equation, which, really is high margin work. But then again, you can hopefully offset that with volume and maybe reduced personnel cost at your restaurant. And so there's a lot of factors that go into it to make sure you're, achieving the best and highest results as a result of that model.
Absolutely. Well, I think we're going to start wrapping up. Is there anything else from the QSR space that you think is important to address that we haven't talked about?
Yeah, the only thing you've hit on a lot of them. I think the safety aspect is big, John. I think that is the where everybody's focusing their efforts, is making sure restaurants are safe in this environment, and you've got to portray that to the market and make sure that customers feel comfortable going to that restaurant. A good example is the Chick-fil-A model, right? Here in Atlanta, I think everyone felt very comfortable and really appreciated the efforts that they went through to make sure that people saw that this could be a touchless environment. And I think that confidence really helped them in kind of growing their business the way that they did. Where we're seeing a lot of energy right now is just on the PPP side, John, and the forgiveness aspect of those loans. A lot of our clients in this space took those loans. Some did pay them back because, again, their business wasn't necessarily impacted as much as they thought. But we are seeing a lot of those engagements. We're getting towards the end of obviously the end of the 8-week period, but the 24-week period. And, we're working and consulting with a lot of clients, making sure they're taking advantage and maximizing that forgiveness for their particular company. So there's a lot of nuances to it. Obviously, the rules are continuing to change daily by the SBA. But at the same time, we're advising and helping our clients, trying to get to that 100% forgiveness, so that ultimately they can use those proceeds to kind of help in this post-COVID environment. So it's a very big exercise for us, and very big for this industry, to help free up some cash to be able to do the things that are needed to kind of get out of this particular cycle.
Absolutely. I remember early on when we were all working on that around the firm, and it did seem like every couple hours we would get updates on the rule
That's right.
changes. So, um,
No, I kudos to Bennett Thrasher. We've got a great team in place to track all of those changes, and I think that we've done a great job of getting the word out there in this environment. And again, this is very critical, for our clients to make sure that they're thinking through this and taking advantage of the opportunities that are out there to get through this particular environment that we're in. So yeah, I think it's a big time for them, and obviously we'll know more in the coming months as we submit these applications and hear back from the SBA. I mean, the biggest concern with a lot of our clients, John, is around that needs analysis, making sure that, they qualify for the loan as a result of, the impact on their business. And so that's where we're seeing a lot of our consulting come into play, is helping clients benchmark it and really tell their story so that, when they present their application, that they're presenting it in the best light for them to achieve that forgiveness.
Gotcha. Well, Cory, thanks a lot for coming on. It's been a great conversation. If there's somebody out there interested in kind of learning more about how we work with restaurants and QSR and other areas of the hospitality, how would they go about reaching you?
Sure. Probably the best way is just the web. I'm on the website as part of the lead there in this particular segment, and it's www.btcpa.net is our web address. And then also you can call me at any time. My direct dial is 678-302-1485, and would love to just catch up. I mean, one of the big things that we enjoy doing is just talking to people. We're not necessarily trying to sell. We're just trying to understand what's going on in the environment. And it's good for us because, again, we can have webinars like this to kind of educate our folks, but also just understand what others are doing so that we can continue to stay on top of this particular change that we're going through. And looking forward to getting on the other end of this. And I definitely think we're making some good progress.
Thanks, Cory. That was great. Well, this wraps up another episode of Think Business. You can reach me again at btcpa.net and at #ThinkBusiness. John Yeager signing off. Have a great weekend.